Yeah, said the only thing I saw was a record. The only thing I folded under was pressure.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Kaeyos from the Rucker Collective with today's sample breakdown. Today we'll be breaking down a throwback sample from my Continuum sample pack called Higher and Higher. And this sample was used in Flip by AYO The Producer and was used on Doja Cat's Scarlet album for the record Skull and Bones. And we're gonna get right into it. All right, great. So we're gonna dive right into the sample real quick. So I basically started with this chord progression. I'm gonna play it real quick. So that was basically the chord progression that I started with. The sound that I used was Sequence Me and Mellotron. And if you guys know a lot about Mellotron, you could do a lot of tweaking and processing within it. So that was basically the foundation of what I laid down. And for the first half of this A section, I also added a bowed electric guitar, which is also in Omnisphere as well. Not much processing done, both on the channel and also inside Omnisphere as well, because sometimes the sounds could kind of speak for themselves. All I did was probably add a vintage EQ, and that was about it. It wasn't anything kind of crazy. But I wanted to add something. I want to add some type of melodic top line to it, right? So this is how this one sounds right here. So yeah, that's basically what I added with the bowed electric guitar. And then on top of that, I wanted to take it a step even further and add a little bit of more top line and going up to a higher register. So I added a strings line right here, and I use power strings wheel also in Omnisphere as well. As far as effects, I just put Proverb on it. That's it. I think it already comes with it inside once you click on the sound. So again, not much processing on this, and here it is. Back and forth between chord progressions, and then also added a harmonic element as well. So yeah, like I said, it wasn't even processed as well on the channel in Fruity Loops, and this is how it sounds all together. This is the first half of the A section. This is what it is. So you could hear some of that. You can hear touches of like auxiliary percussion in there. This is probably the one thing that I process, and that I did that purposely. So I like to kind of add percussion to my samples, but mostly like drops of it here and there with some reverb and some delay, just to add some type of texture as well. So what I added with that, right? I added fruity delay right here, which this is tried and true for me. You can't go wrong with fruity delay, and also fruity reverb, which I still use regardless of the fact that I have so many different reverb plugins from Waves or whoever, you know what I mean? I still rely on this as well because it kind of gets the job done. So that's the only type of processing that I had on the auxiliary percussion. So if we were to go back and play it, right? So as you can see right there, you know, added some percussion. So this is the second half of the A section. So as you can see, the chord progression starts to get a little bigger during that time. So I'm just gonna play it and I'm gonna run through it. As you can see, the chord progression did get bigger. So what was added on top of that during the second half of that A section? So what I did was basically play the same chords, but I did a different inversion, and I used Venus on the third pattern, which is in Mellotron as well. Again, I didn't really process anything with this one because If anybody that uses Mellotron, they already know it's a beast on its own. It doesn't really need much processing, honestly. So this is how it sounds. I'll probably turn the saturation up just a little bit right here when I was playing out the chords. But again, not much processing on this end. All right, so next up in this pattern, I use the B3V plugin, which is also part of the Arturia collection as well. I used an organ called the Iscariot. So same exact thing. I did use, just played out the same chords. Probably did a little bit of a slight variation in the inversions a little bit. Nothing too crazy, honestly. Kept it real light. And to be honest, I just did it just mostly for the texture. So that's one part right there. And then last but not least is for the last half of the A section, I added some Rhodes. Added a little bit of a rhythmic pattern with the Rhodes for this right here as well. So as you can see right here, again, not much processing because, you know, it's Keyscape, and you guys already know Keyscape could stand alone on its own. So I just basically used what was in there as well. For the second half of this A section, I did have a little bit of a bass line, but it was just whole notes just playing the chord progression changes. Yeah, so that I just played out on bass. And now the last two components of the second half of this A section was actually the strings and vox. There was additional strings and additional vocals. This strings line was actually added by my boy Adrian Seeley. Crazy killing strings composer. I had to bring him in on this one, so here it goes. So I did add some vocals, and the vocals were added by my boy Side Effects. Funny story, I sent him a sample to sing vocals on, and this was, this is the one that caught his ear the most, actually. And he did the other one, but he was so fixated on this one, so I was just like, you know what, why not, you know? And it actually brought some color, so here are the vocals that he added. That's the second half of the A section. So now we're gonna move on to the B section real quick. As you can see, the bass line gets a little bit more bouncier. So I'm gonna start with the bass line first. So as you can see, like I added, this is where I processed a little bit. I did make it growl just a little bit. I wanted it to sound purposely dirty for a reason. I added the DI bass guitar preset in Guitar Rig 5, and then just to kind of kill some of the extra noise, I did put a gate on there as well. But yeah, as you can see, when I play along with the Rhodes, it kind of gives a little bit of like a rhythmic conversation in between the Rhodes and the bass line. So that's basically the Rhodes as well. But everything else is still kind of the same up top, right? So when I play everything together, so that is the higher and higher sample. The biggest thing I learned with this sample in particular is a mantra that we preach a lot at Rucker. And it's musicality first, processing later. What I realized with this sample in particular is that there wasn't really much processing, right? On the master channel, all I had was RC20 and I had the Vinyl 1 preset that I had. That was it. And then I I did pitch the whole entire sample up twice. So originally it was in E minor, but then I just decided to put it in an F sharp minor because it definitely gave it like a little bit of a different texture. Going back to what I said about processing, sometimes we tend to over process a lot because we want to invoke that feeling of like authenticity, right? Wanting things to actually sound like vinyl or actually sound like a sample. But sometimes we could overcompensate. And one of the things that we preach at Rucker is that like, hey, like make sure you're musical first. And if you find yourself processing a little too much, that means you probably have to reevaluate the musicality within your sample, right? It's kind of like steak. When you get a good piece of steak, you don't have to do a lot of seasoning. You may have to add like, salt or steak seasoning, that's about it, right? But the steak by itself, if it's a quality piece of steak, right, it could somewhat stand on its own, right? But the seasoning enhances the experience. It doesn't necessarily complete the full taste of the steak. And it's the same exact way that we approach sampling in a sense, right? Like our effects are meant to enhance the experience. They're not meant to necessarily complete it when it comes to using effects processing. So that was the biggest lesson that we took away from this. So after the sample was completed, it got into the hands of AYO, and I think I had it at F sharp, the original, so he probably pitched it up either a half step or a whole step. I'm not really sure, honestly, but I did know the key was higher for the final cut of the record. So I remember waking up to a text from Kaz about the sample, like, hey, this is you, yeah, and usually people are inquiring about samples all the time, well, sample usage all the time. So typically I've had a lot of close calls about, hey, this person used your sample, this and the third, and I always tend to like, push them to the wayside until something actually comes to life. And so I've had a few close calls, honestly. So I let it go. And then a week later, I just remember me and my wife, we were getting ready to go to a party. I was getting ready and I put up a story about me getting excited about my Spartan race, which was later on that week. And I got a reply from AYO. And he just gave me like the praying hands and that was it. Shout out to AYO. And he was like, yo, congrats, my man. And that was it. And I was confused as to why he was saying congrats. And I was actually startled that he followed me as well. So I remember just being like, oh, wow, like, thank you. And thank you for the follow. I mean, we all know his sound has been, the most prominent sound within these last like 10, 15 years in hip hop and in R&B for sure. So at that moment, it was only right that I called Kaz. I was like, okay, something's going on. Like, so of course I hit up Kaz and I kind of told him like, bro, why is AYO telling me congrats? Like, I'm really confused as to why that's happening. And of course, Kaz hits me with the OG talk. Yo, bro, I wasn't trying to get you excited if it wasn't going to come to life and, get you amped up for something that's not going to happen. But if he's hitting you up, tell me, all right, Kaz, tell me, just what's the word? Tell me, I'm about to walk into this party. And my wife, like, walks ahead of me going into the venue to this party. And she's looking back at me like, yo, what are you doing? You know what I mean? And then he said, hey, man, the person who's using, the record that had your sample on the AYO flip was Doja Cat. And I was just like, what? And I was really confused. And, if I'm honest, I never had the chance to actually, like, sit down with her music, but I knew she was obviously a household name for sure. Like, so I was just like, oh wow, like this is crazy. Like I didn't, and this was back in June. And I remember just walking into that party in a daze a little bit like, okay, this is actually happening. And then after that, I spoke to AYO and AYO confirmed it. He was like, yeah, man, we got a record with Doja Cat. So he's the one that actually flipped that sample and shout out to him. Yeah, and then, it was just a waiting game, keeping a tight lip, not being allowed to share with people for quite some time. But there were a lot of lessons that I learned from this moment. Number one, good things take time, good things take time. And as a producer, and as a creative, whether you're a songwriter, producer, there's a phrase that says, Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were laying bricks by the hour, and it just goes to show that you got to keep, planting your seeds. You never know when and where they're going to harvest, but as long as you're being diligent about planting the seeds, something will come to fruition, you know, something that could be completely left, you know. So that's how that story came about. And the biggest thing I also learned too was don't be afraid to collaborate as well. Before I sent it off to friends of mine, I was gonna send it in. I was done. I was already done with what I built. But I just remember having a conversation with Side Effects. Shout out to Side Effects. And I wanted him to sing on another sample, but this one in particular caught his ear, and he was just like, "Bro, I need that." He was like, "I need that one." And so he ended up doing both, and I was like, "You want to do it? That's fine, cool." And then I remember also playing it for Adrian, and he was like, "Hey man, you mind if I add some strings?" So also not being afraid of also collaborating, you know, especially if your friends are inspired by it. Collaboration doesn't take away, you know what I mean? It adds, you know, and especially since this is a collaborative era in music production, it's only right to do it, you know, to collaborate with people that, you know, you love, man. So shout out to AJ and Side Effects, bro, because I was going to send it in and be done and just be like, all right, cool, whatever. But I'm glad that they added, you know, the little bit of sauce. Well, they say it's a little bit of sauce, but that little bit that they added made a big difference in, you know, and made the record what it was. So, yeah.